ANA eLearning Academy is brought to you by CDN Graysheet, a trusted source of rare coin and currency valuations since 1963.
Before we get into discussing the actual presentation, let's talk a little bit about the pronunciation of the title. So both of these V words are derived from Latin. So we could say Virtus and Victoria, but it would be more proper to say Virtus and Victoria if you're pronouncing in Latin. But for the purposes of the talk, I will pronounce Virtus as Virtus because there's no English equivalent. I mean, that's where virtue comes from. That's the derivative of virtue, but Virtus, because it just kind of, to me, sounds silly to say Virtus because there's really no English equivalent. But we'll just pronounce Victoria like Victoria because that's what we're used to. So Virtus and Victoria is how I'm going to say it. I want to just mention that all the coins in the presentation are from my own collection, and this presentation is based on an exhibit that I did, a in-person exhibit at a ANA World's Fair of Money a couple of years ago, and all of the photos are also my own. So if there's any issues with either the coins or the photos, then the buck stops with me because I'm responsible. That said, as well, I'm going to be focusing on silver and bronze coins. I don't have any gold in the collection because gold is very, very rare and expensive. And aside from that, I'm not going to be discussing price. So we're just going to talk about the coin types and the background history for the most part. Okay, so let's, without further ado, we'll start. During the early 3rd century AD, the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus, who reigned from AD 193 to 211, conducted a war against the tribal inhabitants of Caledonia. These tribes, called the Caledonii and the Metii, or Mete, were viewed by the Romans as uncivilized barbarians. Caledonia corresponds roughly with the territory encompassing present-day Scotland. The war began in 208 with Severus's arrival in Britannia following reports of violent barbarian incursions. Establishing his headquarters at Eboracum, which is present-day York, he gathered a huge invading force of more than 50,000 men. And actually, that map is, it's pretty large up here, so it should be fairly visible. Severus was accompanied by his wife Julia Domna and sons and co-rulers Caracalla and Geta. The Severans embarked on campaigns in Caledonia during 209 and 210 and declared victory. The war ended in 211 with Severus's death by illness and the return of his family to Rome. Now in AD 122, the Emperor Hadrian had overseen the construction of a 73-mile wall to protect and regulate the Roman frontier in northern Britain. Another more northerly wall was built from 142 to 154 AD by Antoninus Pius. Both walls sustained heavy damage from barbarian attacks during the reign of Septimius Severus, whose legionaries repaired them in 208. The campaign of AD 209 advanced along Deer Street beyond Hadrian's Wall. So now is a good time to use the laser pointer. So Hadrian's Wall is here, and Deer Street goes all the way from York all the way up to the Antonine Wall here. After crossing the Firth of Forth at Cramond, the army split into two. So there's the Firth of Forth. So the army was all led by Caracalla and Severus. They were all marching together along the Deer Street, and then after they crossed the Firth of Forth, they split. Caracalla led his legionaries along the Highland boundary fault to seal the highlands against enemy reinforcements. So Highland boundary fault is up here. So that's a highland area that was kind of hard. It was, I don't know if I would say it was impassable, but it would have been difficult to pass, and they were kind of constricted to this area. Meanwhile, the forces of Septimius Severus attacked the tribes of the Midland Valley. There's the Midland Valley. And you can see the little arrow here represents Severus's army, and the longer arrow here represents Caracalla. And then these little squares represent army camps. And those are based on, the names of those camps are based on the archaeological sites. So those are actually archaeological sites that were excavated. And so that there's evidence that those were actually the marching camps. So that's where these names derive from. The campaign of 210 repeated the same routes. So 209 and 2010, there were 209 and 210, there were two separate invasions following basically the same exact map. As the Severan army advanced through Britain in AD 209, the soldiers were faced with grim conditions. They struggled to overcome inhospitable terrain and were forced to fight a guerrilla war. When tribal leaders sued for peace, the Romans annexed territory and stationed garrisons. In 210, Caracalla led a second campaign to crush the Métis revolt and was successful enough to achieve lasting peace. Septimius Severus died at Eboracum on 4 February 211, never fulfilling his ambition to conquer the whole island. So the talk discusses coins relating to the war conducted from AD 208 to 211 by the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus and his sons Caracalla and Geta against the tribal inhabitants of Caledonia. The intent here is not to put forth a comprehensive history of the war. It is to examine coins which illustrate the concepts of virtus and victoria within the context of this war, and which were issued contemporaneously with it. So what's being shown is a sestertius of Septimius Severus, and a sestertius is a large bronze coin that was, and this one was struck in 210. So as far as rarity goes, most of the coins that I'm going to be showing are scarce to rare. And those are based on these specific rarity scales. So the coinage of Septimius Severus and his family is based on that's how I'm determining rarity for the silver coins. And the author, Philip Hill, studied 26 hoards of mostly silver coins, with the largest containing 81,000 plus. So there's a lot of coins in there to determine this. So out of more than 81,000 coins, if he's only found one, that's a pretty rare coin. So this is Hill. So R4 for Hill means 0 to 1, and then the declining numbers are more and more coins. And then for the bronze coins, Roman imperial coinage, or RIC, is what's being used to determine rarity. And the rarity for that was determined by examining coins found in major public and private European collections. So that was back in the 30s though. So it's really, it's a general guideline. A lot of the coins may be R5. I don't have anything that's R5, but rarity 16 plus coins. That means there's 16 or more coins that were found in major European public and private collections in the 1930s. So you have to kind of take that with a little bit of, it's not entirely accurate, but it gives us an idea, a general overall relative idea of rarity. So let's talk about virtus. The Latin word virtus connotes qualities of manly excellence, such as courage, character, strength, and valor. Military success was invariably credited to the emperor's virtus. Virtus was sometimes personified as a woman dressed in military attire, as on this coin. This is the same coin I showed before. This is just the reverse. Yet, especially in this era, virtus is more often embodied in depictions of the emperor himself dominating a foe, and we'll see some of those in a little bit. Victoria. The Romans personified the concept of Victoria, or victory, as the winged goddess Victoria. Martial imagery, such as bound captives, battlefield trophies, and piles of captured arms also symbolize victory and are frequently shown alongside Victoria as part of the same design. So here's a coin of Caracalla. It's called an as, that's the denomination, minted in 209. And it shows Victoria attaching a small shield called a buckler to a palm tree. And she's stepping on, I think she's stepping on a little captive, or maybe it's a little helmet there. Virtus and Victoria. These personifications are sometimes shown in combination with figures representing Severus and his sons Caracalla and Geta, who in 210 AD had earned the title of Britannicus Maximus, or the Great Victor of Britain. So the same coin that I've been showing, it does have a small, so it's the personified Virtus crowning Septimius Severus with a laurel wreath, and he's holding a small figure of Victoria in his hand. So this coin has both of those personifications on it. The Virtus of the, what did I just do? Did I pressed something? Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, the Virtus of the emperor. War and politics were inseparable in ancient Rome. The word emperor derives from the Latin imperator, meaning general, and the emperor's legitimacy was largely based on his success as a military leader. His virtus in the form of courageous military exploits was thus viewed as key to victory for the Roman state. Images of the emperor on horseback charging into battle or trampling a fallen enemy visualize the concept of virtus as embodied in his personal exercise of martial force. So on this coin, we have Caracalla on a horse about to spear an enemy or trample an enemy as well. To emphasize his power, the figure of the emperor is disproportionately large compared to the diminutive foeman, diminutive meaning really small, he is about to vanquish. So you can see that the emperor is quite a bit larger on this coin than the smaller barbarian. The emperor on horseback motifs were particularly popular on coins of Septimius Severus, Caracalla, and Geta struck during the Severan invasion of Britain. Yet these depictions do not constitute a documentary record of actual events. And you can see on this one, this is Caracalla on horseback, and he's trampling a really tiny foe. It's about the size of a cat. Literary accounts and archaeological evidence point to their derivative nature, and they must instead be interpreted as the continuation of a standardized iconographic language developed under previous emperors. They were thus likely modeled after second century statues or relief sculptures. So I have this, I'm showing this print of a relief sculpture from the 2nd century showing a soldier on horseback, spear, about to throw his spear. The horse is rearing. And if we look at the coin next to it, it's very similar. And so this is where these images on the coins of this era are deriving from. And I'm showing this coin in reverse, sorry, as a mirror image of the actual coin to show that this would be, if on the real coin, do I have that? Yes, here's the coin. The emperor is facing left. The die would be facing right. And if the die is based on images from Roman relief sculptures, Roman reliefs were read from left to right. So most of the figures are going to be facing right. So it's kind of interesting to imagine that these dies were maybe directly modeled after these types of relief sculptures. And then when they were struck on the coin, they just appeared as a mirror image facing left. So what I have here is kind of an array of emperor on horseback denarii. So denarii is the denomination. It's a silver coin, a smaller silver coin. And these are showing Septimius Severus and his sons on horseback, advertising their virtus on horseback. Most of them are showing them trampling or spearing a small barbarian. And these were struck, all of these were struck between AD 208 and 210. This is showing, this is not a complete set. So all of these types are slightly different. Each coin on here represents a type that's slightly different. So for example, the three different coins of Septimius Severus, they all have Emperor-on-Horseback reverses, but they have different titles in the legend, which helps us date the coins. So the one on the right over here on the far left, there's titles on the reverse that help us date the coin to 208. And here there's titles on the reverse, the one next to it, that help us date to 209 and so on. So if you're interested in collecting these as kind of a typeset, then you would probably want to get one from each emperor for each year. And there are also a couple of, like this one shows Caracalla, rather than rearing on horseback, he's kind of just walking over the enemy. So this, like I said, this is not a complete set. I would say I'm probably missing one or two of the rarest ones. But I also have down here notated the rarity. So R4 is the rarest. That's based on Hill, the reference. That's one to none in his 81,000 plus hoard. That doesn't mean that you can't find these. There's more out there than that, but they come up every so often. But they are hard to find in good condition. These images of the emperor on horseback showing his virtus are propagandistic fantasies. Caracalla probably did lead troops from horseback during the Caledonian campaigns, but the barbarians' guerrilla tactics avoided pitched battles. So the barbarians were hiding in the undergrowth in the woods, and they're coming out and they're ambushing, and there's really not going to be an opportunity for this pitched battle in a field where there's an opportunity for a rider to be riding down these barbarians. So it's propaganda. And according to the Roman writers Dio and Herodian, Severus was aged and infirm and had to be conveyed in a litter. He would have been too weak to personally engage in the enemy from horseback. So Severus probably was not even riding a horse at all during this time. And Geta had been assigned to administrative duties to be carried out from the Severan headquarters at Eboracum, which is York, modern day York, far from the battlefront. So, Geta is basically, paper pushing, and he really isn't out in the battlefield spearing barbarians either. So the cult of Victoria Britannica, let's talk about that. The personified deity Victoria Britannica seems to be a specific aspect of the Roman goddess Victoria, and therefore essentially the same. Worship of Victoria Britannica is known from the evidence of inscriptions dating to the victory in Britain achieved by the Emperor Claudius in AD 43. The cult was an offshoot of the imperial cult and thus focused primarily on the veneration of the emperor himself. After the death of Claudius, the cult diminished in importance until the goddess appeared on a series of coins struck under Antoninus Pius in AD 143 to 44. The most famous and prolific appearance of Victoria Britannica occurs on imperial coins struck under Septimius Severus, Caracalla, and Geta. So, in other words, Victoria Britannica is not the invention of the Severans. It appeared well before them, and they're using that same kind of iconography, but they struck the most coins that have Victoria Britannica appearing on them. So she really this goddess really came into her own under the Severans. So the coin being shown is Septimius Severus, a Denarii. On the reverse, there's a figure of Victoria Britannica, and she is, most often the legend abbreviates that as Victoriae Brit, but it should be, it's representing Britannica. And again, she's attaching a shield to a palm tree, which is a symbol of victory. Although coins bearing images of Victoria were perennially popular with the Severans, those relating specifically to the war in Britain are identified by their legends. So as I just mentioned, Victoriae Brit associates Victoria with the British victories. There were Severan struck lots of coins with Victoria on the reverse, and she has different epithets. Her name is Victoria, but then they tag on Britannica, or they tag on Parthica, which means victory in Parthia, or victory in whatever other territory that they conquered. So these coins include Victoriae Britannicae, which means the British victory, and abbreviations thereof, or imperial titles which date the coins between 208 and 211. Here's a slide showing the types of Denarii of Septimius Severus and his sons, showing Victoria Britannicae types. And this would be a complete set. So there's 4 different types, reverse types, different poses, I guess, of Victoria on coins of Severus. And there's 2 different types on coins of Caracalla. I should say Denarii specifically, and then 2 different types on Denarii of Geta. And one of the interesting things about this is that there are 8 types in the series, and each type was probably struck in a different workshop or officina within the Roman mint. So 4 workshops would have been dedicated to striking coins of Severus. So we've got 4 different types, and then 2 each would be dedicated to striking coins of Caracalla and Geta. So it helps us learn something about the operations of the Roman mint. Of course, we don't have any mint records. We don't have any written records. So, we're kind of deducing this, but we don't know 100%, but it seems like a reasonable conclusion that each officina struck a different type. All right, so if you're thinking about collecting these, die links can be interesting. Once you have one of each type, you may recognize, as you're looking for, as you're out there looking for coins, you may recognize one that you already own that was struck from the same die. So in this case, well, I should define die link. So a die link means 2 or more coins that were struck from the same die. So an obverse die link means that the obverses were struck from the same die and the reverses from a different die. And a reverse die link means that the reverses were struck from the same die and the obverse from a different die. And a die duplicate means that both the obverse and reverses were struck from the same dies. So what I'm showing here are Victoriae Brit types of Geta, a type that there's 3 different coins with 3 different struck from 3 different obverse dies, but the same reverse die. And this is kind of interesting because usually you'll find ancient coins, you'll find more die links with the reverse, or fewer die links with the reverses because the obverses lasted longer. The obverse was the one in the anvil, and the reverses were the ones that were struck with the hammer, and so they broke more often. So when you see more die links on the reverse, that indicates that this is a very limited series because there were fewer dies. So on this slide, when I'm going to press the forward button to activate a little animation. So I have, actually, let me go back for a minute. I've got these, so these coins were struck from the same reverse die. This one is in really good shape, not very much wear. This one has a little bit more wear, and this has a lot of wear. So we can also see the way that the design wears. Like, what's the part that wears the most? What's the highest point? Which I would say would be this little sash down here this little fold of drapery is the one that wears the most on this more worn one. So on the next slide, if I press the on my keyboard, I'm going to press the arrow to activate a little animation, and it's going to show, it's going to kind of go from not very worn to a bit more worn. So we can see how the design is wearing. Her sash is getting, it's getting a little bit more flat there. And so this is very worn. So there's a lot of things that you can learn from studying die links. And I don't think I'm going to spend too much more time on this because I know that we do have limited time. But on this, I do want to mention that the same reverse die, the same obverse die was used with a reverse die that is not part of the series. And numismatists, historians usually date these Victoriae Brit types to 210 or 211 AD. They're not dated though, but this is now linked to something just completely outside of the series. It's Felicitas with a little cornucopia there. It has nothing to do with Brit, but there's the titles of Geta there, and that dates it to 211. So we can say that with pretty good certainty, we can guess that these were both minted in 211 or close to it. And then more about die links. This is showing 4 different obverse dies and paired with only 3 different reverse dies, and one of them out of the series. So it can help us to, when we study these dies, it can help us to reconstruct some aspects of ancient coin production. So in this case, fewer reverse dies indicate a more limited series. So on to Cult of Victoria Britannica. Severus and his sons were likely granted the title of Britannicus Maximus no earlier than the spring of 210. So Victoria coins bearing reference to this title can be dated from 210 or 211, which is something we just kind of discussed. Some victory types without the title Britannicus Maximus or without Victoriae Britannicae on the reverse can be inferred from their chronological context as also referring to the cult of Victoria Britannica. The Severans would not have waited until their claims of victory could be ratified by the Senate to invoke the goddess for the purpose of advertising their success. So remember that the Severans invaded in 209 and 210. So already in 209, we have some coins with already in 208, we even have coins with a victory. They were already in Britain, and we've got victory with a little trophy here. And we're dating it by these titles. We know it's from 208. Well, this is propaganda. So the emperor, the Severans, the emperor always wants to be associated with victory. So it's kind of like a preemptive type. And in this one is dated to 211. It doesn't have the title Victoria Britannicae, but we could assume that maybe this is representing her. She's on the prow of a ship, which could represent the naval support, possibly. That for the supply lines that was needed for the invasion. So who were the Caledonii? The Caledonii were a confederation of tribal peoples who inhabited northern Britain during ancient times. Although primarily an agrarian society, they fiercely resisted Roman occupation and were never fully conquered. Tattooed Caledonian warriors fought naked and painted themselves blue to terrify their enemies. It seems that the later Romans considered the Picts, P-I-C-T-S, to be descendants of the Caledonii, but the names may have been used interchangeably. So the image that I have here is a later image done in, I think, the 16th century. And it is titled, it's saying it's depicting a Pict. But we can, just based on the descriptions from the historian like Cassius Dio, we can kind of think that the Caledonians looked pretty much something like this. Martial imagery. The Romans were ruthless in warfare and pursued victory with dogged determination. They viewed massacre and atrocity as practical paths to lasting peace. These characteristics are reflected on coins bearing military themes, which originated during the Republic and continued throughout the imperial era. Spoils of war, such as small captive barbarians, often serve to accessorize the larger figures of deities or the emperor. So here you've got two victories attaching a shield to a palm tree and two really tiny barbarians underneath them. For ancient engravers, wide diameter bronze coins offered an expansive canvas for rendering complex scenes composed of multiple figures and objects. Martial types relating to the Severan invasion of Britain are mostly adaptations of standard themes developed over centuries. So again, we can look at a relief sculpture from, I think, the 2nd century and see similar kinds of imagery with the captive barbarians with their hands bound behind their backs underneath a trophy. Yet as tangible physical objects connected to this remote chapter of the past, the coins that survive are of great historical interest. A few even depict idealized versions of actual events. The Sestercius of Caracalla, for example, shows Severus and his sons standing amongst a group of soldiers. Emphasizing their power and Virtus, the emperors loom over a captive. Could this scene record the victorious aftermath of the Caledonian campaign of AD 210? Now, if it does depict that, it's idealized. Now, I colorized this coin so it would be more clear what the figures are, because this coin was double struck. It was struck once, and then it shifted, and then it was struck again. So it's kind of like off center, and it muddles up the design a little, but I kind of outlined, colored in these figures in the legend as best I could. So you can see who's who. So we have Caracalla, Gaeta, Severus. There's a captive, and there are two soldiers, and they're holding standards, military standards. So this could be an idealized scene of the barbarians, surrendering. So a gallery of imperial bronzes bearing martial imagery struck between AD 208 and 211. There's quite a variety of different types. You can see that there's over here, there's a trophy. So a trophy back then was captured arms and armor that were set up on a pole, kind of almost like a scarecrow. And that's where we get our trophy from. That's where the little Oscar comes from. He comes from the trophy. Provincial propaganda. The Roman state granted authorities to provincial cities to the Greek East for the minting of local coinage. So on this coin of Serdica in Thrace that was minted around 211 AD, we can see figures of Caracalla and Gaeta. Here's which is not entirely certain. Which one is Caracalla, which is Gaeta, but there's the little captive barbarians at the base of a trophy. So even though this does not have a title Victoria Britannica, we can, just from the context and the dating, we can surmise that this is what it was celebrating. Provincial coin reverses were typically dedicated to subjects of civic interest, such as temples, deities, mythological scenes, and cult objects of local significance. Yet most cities struck a proportion of their coinage with propagandistic imagery devoted to venerating the imperial cult, which worshiped the emperor and ruling dynasty. And so, as I pointed out, there they are labeled. So tropaeum is the Latin name, the Latin word for trophy. The reversed spear represents peace. Images of Nike, who is the Greek equivalent to Victoria, or depictions of the emperor demonstrating his virtus were meant to foster a sense of confidence in the power of the emperor and the strength of the Roman military. So these are coins from Antioch and Pisidia. Well, the top one is here, the larger one, Antioch and Pisidia, and Stobi and Macedonia, and both were struck about around that same time. So these can be, we can associate these with the victories in Britain. Most provincial cities of the Eastern Roman Empire were thus were governed under Hellenistic law. Thus, most Eastern coinages bear Greek legends. But as these coins show, some cities such as Antioch and Pisidia and Stobi in Macedonia carried the honor of ius Italicum, Italic law, by which their citizens enjoyed the privilege of Roman citizenship. These cities were governed under Roman law, and their coins were struck with Latin legends. Okay, so here's a little gallery of coins commemorating the Caledonian campaigns on coins of Pisidian Antioch, which is in Asia Minor, from AD 209 to 212. And just, you know, incidentally, these two coins were struck with the same obverse, coins of Geta. So we have some with the Emperor-on-Horseback sparing the tiny barbarian, which would represent the emperor's virtus. And then we have some over here with victory. So in conclusion, the extent to which the virtus and Victoria advertised on Severan coinage adhere to historical truth is not entirely certain. Literary accounts by ancient authors can be vague, incomplete, conflicting, and biased. Despite the evidence of archaeology and other fields, much remains lost to the mists of time. What is clear is that the Virtus and Victoria coin types struck under the Severans have been adapted from established patterns of visual representation developed under previous emperors. They bear time-tested propagandistic imagery meant to show the emperor, the ruling dynasty, and the Roman military in the best possible light. So here's bibliography, which is very small, so you probably can't read it. And that's the end. So if there are any questions, I think we have time, right? Okay. Any questions? Yes.
So here's the titles of the rulers on the reverse to take down.
Yeah.
So is there, that you're comparing to, is there contemporary literature that talks about these
It's so you mean how do I know that the titles correspond to certain dates? Yeah. Sources, so numismatic references, historical sources. It's pretty well established. So I'm basing mine on previous experts. I'm not personally dating them. I'm using references to say, hey, these were the titles during this particular date. So it's pretty well established what the dates were for what the titles were for each emperor for each date. So it's not really something that's, I mean, it's pretty well established, basically.
contemporary historians who documented that?
No, it's a good question. I'm not sure. So I'm not sure exactly how modern historians have developed the dates. I'm thinking it has something to do also with archaeology and what is it? Epigraphy, which is the study of written inscriptions and that sort of thing. I think it's more than just numismatics. Yes. Michael. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. I don't think so. I think that these were all struck at Rome, just based on, it's based on the style, because usually different mints have a distinct style. And I think if there was a traveling mint, like Caesar had a traveling mint, you know, Julius Caesar had a traveling mint, and that famous elephant coin of Caesar, I think, was struck at this traveling mint. And that's really well known among numismatists or ancient, you know, people who are into that stuff. And as far as I know, there were none at that time. All the coins were minted at Rome, and they were shipped over to, they might have been shipped over to Britain. I mean, not that we're talking about imperial coins, right? You know, yeah, the Rome mint coins, yes. So to answer your question, no, not to my knowledge were any of the coins struck in Britannia. So that would account for maybe a delay also in, you know, how long would it take for it once they're declared, once the Senate ratifies them as having the title of Victoria of Britannicus Maximus, you know, how long does that take for the coins to get back to Britain, or, you know, anyway. Anybody else? Like, any other questions? Yes. Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, you know, so they're being minted and the Senate hasn't ratified and they're getting distributed.
Mhm.
For the average Roman or person using the coin, did they really like stop and say, oh wow, like my emperor is doing great, or was it just
I think that they were much more aware of the symbolic images on coins than we are now. I mean, for most people now, most non-coin collectors, they don't really look at their pocket change, and it's not that, it's something that just doesn't influence them. But at the time back then, that was a form of mass media, and they relied on these images. They were all Roman citizens would have been familiar with the gods, and the emperor would have been as kind of there was a cult, a religious cult of the Roman emperor. And so the portrait was really important, and how the emperor was depicted in the portraiture was important, and the specific gods associated with the emperor that would have been chosen for the reverse were important, and the various titles. Now, I always wonder, you know, they didn't have glasses back then, so how many people really could even see them? You know, I always think that, I'm like, without, you know, how many people could actually see what was on their coins? But I think that it was an important, it was like the main form of mass media at the time. So any other questions? All right, well, thank you.
That was a great, my favorite part of Roman coinage is the Severan dynasty. I call it. But on behalf of the ANA, I'd like to present you with a certificate with your name and the title of your presentation today.
Thank you.
And on behalf of the Chicago Coin Club, I guess this is your second medal for this presentation, but this is the first one that you got to get in person.
Yes.
With your name engraved, and we would encourage you to wear this around so that people can see.
Okay, I will.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. And actually, I think the other one was for the Elagabalus presentation. So I think this is the first one.